Hello there, this is Andrew from Sommo, where we help clients all over the world build responsive and create mobile and web apps using no-code tools such as Bubble, Webflow, and others. And today in this video, I would like to show you how to performance optimize your Webflow site so that you create great, snappy websites for your users. First of all, why performance is important. Apart from just giving your users a better user experience and making them wait faster for your website to load or to make any interactions, good website performance does improve your conversion rates, as the results show, so that it improves your business metrics as well. Plus, good performance helps rank your website higher in Google search ratings and in other search engine ratings, so that you will get more free organic visitors to your website if your website performs better. Now, how to measure your site performance? Well, there are a number of different metrics that you can use. The most popular ones are Google Page Speed Insight, which you can find at pagespeed.web.dev or Lighthouse metrics. In reality, they are almost the same. PageSpeed Insight uses the Lighthouse tool under the hood that measures your site ratings and report them here for you. This includes 6 key metrics like first contentful paint, speed index, largest contentful paint, time to interactive, etc. Each of them has different weights in your final score here. You can play around with the calculator here to see how each of this metric impacts your website. And we can see that some metrics have 10% impact and others like total blocking time have 30% impact. I recommend you check out about each of these metrics here in details if you're not familiar with them yet, to know what they measure, and you thus would know what to change or improve on your site to get them to the green zone. Plus, PageSpeed Insight show you some core web vitals, as they call them. It's a set of metrics measured over the previous 28 30 days and reported here. They include some of the same Lighthouse metrics, but also some new metrics like first input delay, etc. Now, how to get the best metrics according to Lighthouse or Google PageSpeed Insight. Oh, one more, by the way. You can measure them not only on the PageSpeed side, but also inside Chrome DevTools. If you open DevTools and go to Lighthouse, you can analyze your site and get the summary of this metrics report here, right here in Chrome. And I would recommend you do it from the DevTools. It's faster, and also you can run them through the incognito tab so that your metrics here fluctuate less and you get more consistent results, because as you'll see by yourself, they fluctuate quite a lot. Incognito mode, they fluctuate a little bit less. Okay, let's move now to the Webflow, how to get the best of your Webflow site. First of all, don't neglect leveraging the default Webflow optimization tools that they give you out of the box. For example, like minimizing all your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code so that your website total size is as small as possible. And under the hood, Webflow does a lot of other things to help you minimize your website size and make it load faster. For example, like they automatically resize and serve different responsive images of your website so that your images load faster. Unfortunately, these default settings are not enough, and you would do much more to make your Webflow site performant. Let's move one by each major category, and let's start with scripts. Most likely, when you analyze your website performance, scripts would be one of the top recommendations. Like you can see here that Google will complain about and recommend you to get rid of them. Unfortunately, for any modern site, you cannot really get away without using any script. Most likely, you'll have some analytics, Google Tag Manager, Google Analytics, or ad scripts etc., and most likely a couple of them. But there are ways to reduce their impact. First of all, remove anything that is not required. That could be an analytics that you don't actually use all the time, then enable it for a while, measure what you need, and disable. Or that you maybe not need to use it at all, or maybe some remnants of the old website version that you just forgot to delete. Whatever is actually needed and essential for your website, move to the footer code section, not in the head code. Even though in the documentation of all of this site analytics, they ask you to put it in the header. Don't do that. And in the footer, they would be just fine and would also work perfectly fine. Another recommendation is to, when you use your scripts, to leverage the async and defer attributes that you can attach to any script. They help your site. They tell your browser to continue parsing your site and not wait for the execution of this script. They behave slightly differently and have an important difference, so that async does not guarantee when the script will be executed, and defer guarantee that it will be executed only after the parsing of your DOM tree of your website is complete. So defer is useful if your script interacts with the elements, like if it's some animation or UI library, and async script helpful for general scripts that don't need particular DOM elements of your site, like analytics, etc. In practice, most of the time I use async attribute with my scripts, and it works well. But test both versions and see which one works better and applicable in your case. If it is possible, I recommend you to also minimize the script loading by taking some small scripts if you have such. For example, like in this case, we had this cookie banner code, a really small one. You can see here maybe 10-15 lines. And instead of loading it from the external just deliver CDN, we just embedded it directly in the code here, and it works perfectly fine, and you don't need to make one more request. Of course, you wouldn't be able to do it for big scripts, and also Webflow has a limit of total number of symbols you can put here in the custom code section. It is 20,000 symbols, so leverage only for really small scripts. Okay. One of the another hack that you can do with your scripts that in order to optimize them is to delay their loading. Let me show you some magic. You can take your instead of embedding your script directly, you can wrap them around in the function, like here, wait for everything, that you will call not immediately but after some timeout, like here after 5 seconds, 5,000 milliseconds. It means that when you open your page, these scripts wouldn't be actually loaded at first, and they would be loaded only after this 5 seconds or whatever you define would come. You can notice, for example, on this side, there is no chat bubble here, and it appeared just now. This would work only for scripts that are not critical and that you can postpone their loading for later time. Like I use it typically for customer support chats. Typically it's not critical if they load after a couple of seconds, or for analytics like Hotjar. Caution here is that don't use this approach for critical analytics like Google Analytics, because they would mess up with your metrics like time on the page, bounce rate, etc., and your metrics would not be correct. Use this delayed loading with set timeout only for scripts that are not critical to have immediately as your page loads. One more suggestion that you can do with your scripts is you can conditionally load them. This is, for example, what we did for one of the clients and their ad scripts. They had a bunch of ad scripts that were really heavy altogether, and we identified that when they were not doing remarketing, they actually didn't need to have all the ad scripts at once. So that we created condition and identify parameters through UTM source and URL parameters like fbacklink, GCLID, etc. And this means that the users that came to site came from the ad campaigns, and we only then loaded this ad script. In this case, we were using segment, but it is applicable to any approach how you load your scripts, so that we significantly reduce the total number of scripts loaded and executed on the page for each site visit. That's it. One more suggestion that for you to do with your site in order to help the script to load faster is to pre-connect to the origins of the external assets that you load. In this case, most likely, I highly recommend you to pre-connect to the assets.website files. This is the source where most of the Webflow assets live, like images, scripts, CSS files, JS files, etc. If you're using other scripts and JS libraries, pre-connect to these sources as well. It basically tells your browser to start connecting to this external origin immediately, as soon as possible, as soon as it has some free time, so that when you actually need to download the content there, the connection is already established and the download will happen much faster. In reality, on slow networks, most of the time takes the connecting to the external origin and exchanging the certificates and establishing the connection, and not the downloading itself. So it would help also in many cases reduce your total page load time and give you a better performance for your users. Okay, that's it about scripts. Let's move to the other big topic for performance side optimization is the fonts. And unfortunately, fonts are done very bad in Webflow by default. Typically, most of developers use this standard Google font or here like Adobe Fonts section and don't use it. This is the worst way you can embed fonts. You can include fonts on your file, on your site. Instead, just download the source files of your fonts from Google Fonts or whatever else you take them and install them here directly with the swap settings. It is the most efficient setting of font display in CSS. It doesn't block your site from showing your text with whatever font available, and then it would swap the font later when the font file is actually loaded and applied to your page. This way your performance would be much better and Lighthouse will not complain typically about your fonts. Of course, preferably minimize the total number of fonts that you load. Typically 1-2 fonts is enough. Don't go to too many fonts, and if performance is important for you, maybe you don't actually load any fonts at all and just use standard system fonts so that you don't need to load anything. One more performance optimization, if you want to go to the actual top, you can load your fonts not through Webflow by uploading a custom font, but actually by going directly to the source of the font. First pre-connecting to this source of the font, and then preloading it in the head before even it starts loading the CSS and then loading the fonts. This is probably the most efficient way of loading fonts I've ever found. It has drawbacks though, that this way through code you wouldn't be able to, you'll still load your fonts, but you wouldn't be able to use it as a select, you wouldn't be able to select it from fonts in Webflow, like from here. They just wouldn't be available here. So that in order to use this approach, I'll insert the link of course in the description, you would need first to load them as custom fonts, select them from the drop down here in Webflow, and only then swap, exchange the fonts through code loading. I recommend it only if for critical cases when you want to get the absolute maximum amount possible from your website. Okay, cool. Now let's move to another big topic, images on your Webflow site. Images is also an important part of assets of any website. Thankfully, they are implemented pretty well in Webflow, and from recently they started supporting WebP image format, so that preferably converts most of your images to the WebP format. It is super efficient file format, and that can reduce your total file size by 90-95%. Sometimes it's just like magic. The quality did not change noticeably, but the size like reduced 90-95%. Webflow is great. They can help you compress automatically and convert to Webflow to WebP images in your website. So leverage this feature, and it automatically will swap the images and compress them. If they wouldn't do that in your CMS collection. So for example, if you have blog items and inside these blog items you have images, these images here on the page would not, at least yet, would not be converted automatically to WebP, so that you need to convert them manually and upload here in the CMS. And for manual image compression and conversion, I use a nice free site, Scoosh. Perfect. You can upload an image and convert it to your WebP1. And there are a number of free sites like TinyPNG, TinyHPEG, etc. So use any of them to convert your images to WebP. Okay. This applies for images for like normal images. If you have vector images on your page, they are typically useful for icons. Like here, convert them to SVGs, and whenever possible, use SVGs, because they can be even smaller than WebP images. But not always. Sometimes, depending on the structure of the file, of the image, etc., SVGs can be actually can be actually of heavier and take more size than the WebP or PNGs. So make sure you check it and use the format that actually gives you the best file size. You can upload SVGs as regular images as well through your asset file, or I would recommend you another optimization. If you use a small SVG file, embed, instead of linking them as image, embed them as code directly in your page. For example, like here, create custom HTML embed element and paste the SVG code directly here. This way you wouldn't be able, this way the SVG would load together with the initial page load, and your browser wouldn't need to make another separate request to load your files. For whatever images that are lower in the page and not on the first section, make sure to leverage the lazy load setting for any of your images, regardless if it's of the file format. Use this lazy load so that the browser doesn't try to load them immediately and only loads them later when the user scrolls and when the browser has free time. No need to lazy load images on the initial size, in the initial section, because it wouldn't help anyway. Another important, very important recommendation is to not use the background with images. For any HTML element here in Webflow, whether it's a section, div, or anything, you can use backgrounds. And one of the options that it gives you, you can use the image. And for example, insert this image on the background, maybe center it here, etc. Well, don't do that, never. Neither Webflow nor any browser can optimize these background images. They cannot load them asynchronously, they cannot convert them to smaller sizes, and cannot resize them, cannot lazy load. It gives you absolute worst performance. You can always achieve the same functionality or the same effects, but just combining a regular image, EMG, preferably lazy loaded, on the background and positioning your elements so that you achieve the same effect, probably leveraging like object fit property of the images, and you will still have your images on the background, optimized, lazy loaded, converted to different sizes, and but then they would perform much better than the background images like here. Reserve this background section only for colors or gradients, and never use images here on the background. Okay, that's all about images in general. Let's move to the next section, is about videos. For some reason, videos here in Webflow, if you use the regular video tag, they can work well, but quite often they don't. And for example, there are lots of discussion and complaints on the Webflow forums that they're transcoding and then the default video tool, actually when they try to optimize the videos, they result in a almost twice as big size as the original one. And in general, they don't tend to perform well, the standard Webflow video tag. So instead, either use the YouTube video tag and embed your videos as a link from YouTube where you can have lots of settings, or just use an HTML embed element and embed them as iframe, and the regular iframe from either from YouTube, Vimeo, or from any other video source that you need. A bit of caution though, if you embed YouTube, be aware that according to YouTube terms of service, they can actually show you ads and show ads for your users, even when you embed, for example, like your company show reel or promotional videos on your YouTube, on your site through YouTube. So just know about that. And if it's not acceptable for your website, use services like Vimeo that don't play ads in the embedded videos. Okay, let's move to another section about that can help you optimize your Webflow site, and that is general site organization. In the style manager right here, you have this option to clean up classes, and don't forget to check it periodically and clean up actually your classes, because when you remove the page or you remove the element, etc., its classes are not removed, and with time they can add up to lots of unused classes that still get compiled and served with your CSS file and make your website heavier. You can also do the same cleanup for your interaction in the interactions tab here and remove unused animation. Don't neglect this feature. Also, to Webflow also applies a general good programming and site organization practices, and use a consistent class naming convention. Webflow recommends BM naming convention so that your classes have an organized name, and both you and other developers that come after you would be able to read your website and leverage the existing classes and understand how the classes are structured, so that they don't invent their own necessary classes and reuse maximally the existing ones. Another popular style guide for naming Webflow classes is the Refocus style guide for Webflow. Check it out on their website, and also pretty popular and useful. Make sure also to organize your classes correctly and set global styles on your for your global classes. For example, like setting default text colors, font sizes, the actual font family on the body level or on the each tag level, like H1, H2, P, etc., and not on an individual separate class, because it would bloat your total number of classes and the total size of your CSS files, and it can lead to cases, for example, like I encountered in one of the pages which I worked. For example, developers, instead of setting one default class once, they repeated font family Montserrat like almost 300 times, and obviously it's a lot of unnecessary text that gets loaded with each page, and lots of unnecessary repetition. Make sure to use an organized style guide for your site, and organize your classes and set styles on the root level, and don't repeat them with every tag. Another recommendation regarding this site structure organization is that Webflow has a couple of extra features, for example, like e-commerce that you can enable for your site, but be very, very cautious. Unfortunately, for some reason, you can enable, for example, e-commerce only once for your site, and then you cannot disable. The bad part is that once you enable them, and even if you don't use these e-commerce features, Webflow will still compile and serve with your site a lot of extra JS code and generate a new default template pages so that your total page size would become much larger compared to, for example, like regular CMS site, and obviously it wouldn't help your performance optimization. A common mistake is I see, for example, users go to templates and buy a template and don't check if it's like a CMS or e-commerce template. They just see a nice design, like it, buy it without checking it, and want to use it just for CMS, but in actually, for example, like in this case, but it actually is e-commerce, and they already automatically get this feature turned on and they cannot turn it off, and thus they are stuck with a bad performing site with e-commerce features enabled that they actually don't use. So be sure to check that everything not used is disabled so that your website is not heavier than needed. One more optimization feature that you can implement is to, for example, preload your links. If you have any links on your website, you can, for example, activate the feature of preload if you are sure that your user are likely to click on it. This is a bad example actually, but this might be applicable, for example, for your contact us page of your main CTA, like purchase, etc. In that case, this page that you preload will be loaded in the background by browser, and then when your user clicks on it, finally they will see this page almost instantly. You can even pre-render it, and the experience will be even much harder, much better, and much faster for user. But of course, if the user doesn't click on it, then all the resources and all the CPU time and network time that the browser wasted for this preloading and maybe pre-rendering would be in vain, and it might actually decrease your site performance. Make sure to use this feature sparingly and only for the critical, typical like purchase, subscribe, contact us flows that are most important for your site. Okay, that's it on the total optimization that you can do for your Webflow site. A couple of other suggestions for you to keep in mind. As I mentioned, these results that both Lighthouse and PCI show you will fluctuate on your site, and it depends on your network, on your hardware and software plugins you use, etc. So in order to get a more or less accurate picture, make sure to run this test a couple of times and then get the average, because these metrics would vary from time to time. As I mentioned, for like a more accurate and less fluctuating result, better open an incognito tab and measure your site rate your site metrics through Lighthouse on the incognito size. They typically fluctuate a bit less than if you measure them in the normal tab or through PCI site. Another recommendation is to, whatever I just told you, whatever you read anywhere else on the internet, make sure to test all of these suggestions and approaches on your particular cases, and make sure that they actually work in your particular cases, because depending on your site structure, on what you load, how you display it, what interaction you have on the page, not all might be applicable for your site, and some suggestions might actually make your site slower or decrease your user experience. So make sure to check everything on your particular one, measure it, and leave only what works and what helps your site load faster and work faster. Another suggestion is a bit maybe complex, but still useful. Learn to use the performance and network and in general dev tools on your in Chrome, for example. That way you would be able to measure and analyze exactly what happens on your site. For example, like in this case, when your site starts loading, what it loads and in what order. For example, like the initial HTML, then the CSS, then a couple of images, as you see assets here, and when the actual first paint FCP event is tracked by Google Lighthouse, so that you know exactly what comes after what resources and assets are redundant, what you can postpone loading, what you can remove, etc. And it would give you a lot of insights into what happens on your site, so that you can know later what to optimize or remove. Well, and in general, unfortunately, except that because of the way how Webflow is structured and how it is served to your users, almost very, very, very unlikely that you'll be able to achieve the green zone of this dreamed about 90-100 rating according to PCI and Lighthouse metrics. Most likely, your website will be somewhere a good performing Webflow website, production ready with a couple of analytics and with 15-20 pages, would be somewhere in the zone of 75-80. For example, like our site, it is already pretty good performance. You can achieve much more, of course, just disabling all the scripts and analytics. But what production site functions nowadays without analytics? So just accept that most likely your good performance zone will be a yellow one, somewhere in the range 70 to 80. This is because Webflow serves your your site with one single CSS and one single JavaScript, so that if you view your site code, you can find that all your CSS is in one file like this one, and it includes all the styles of your page that you have, all the styles of your site collected from all the pages. Unfortunately, Google Webflow cannot strip only the styles used on the particular page, and it cannot inline these styles here. This would greatly improve the site speed and load time. Fortunately, Webflow doesn't do it right now, and they seems don't have plan for it. So we kind of like on Webflow stuck with the way it works like now, and it leads to typically yellow zone of the PCI metrics. You can, however, find a workaround of that. For example, you can design your Webflow, your site in Webflow, and then fetch and parse all of your pages, recompile them in line CSS and JS yourself, and redeploy it to your own hosting, for example, to own CDN like Cloudflare. But it, of course, violates Webflow terms of services, and I wouldn't recommend you, of course, doing it. So this all recommendation came from blood and sweat and many tests. Hope you find them useful and will leverage them to make your own Webflow site snappy, performant, achieve great ratings, and rank well on Google, and delight your users. If you find it helpful, of course, click like, subscribe. And if you need any help with your own Webflow site, we would be glad to help at Sommo. Just click contact us and leave us a message. Thanks for watching. Take care. Bye bye.